I'm Paul Arnold. If it's not too grandiose a title, I'm a bit of a polymath because on the one hand, I'm a trained psychotherapist, but then I've also spent a career in the advertising world doing strategic planning. I train a lot and also facilitate. And this session is all about how do you facilitate meetings? Now, I've actually facilitated hundreds of strategic workshops. Frankly, some have gone better than others, and there's a lot which I've learned about what makes the difference that makes the difference. And basically what I want to talk about is there are two fundamental things you've got to look out for. There's the logistics, and that's like pretty bog standard stuff, and I'm going to do that second because the most important thing is the people side. Now, there are two types of facilitation I've noticed. There is what I call process, in other words, where you are brought in to basically go and help facilitate their thinking, and they basically own the content. And it's only up to you to guide them to find their own answers, which for me is the most powerful space to work in. And then some people want you to come along and like drive the content. Well, that for me is a slightly different brief, and that's a much more of a strategic planning exercise, which I can do, but I think it's very clear up front. You have absolute clarity what's being expected from you. Now, in the people, there are two sides. There is them and there's you. And the very first thing is you've got to be really clear who the people who are coming in the room are. Who are the stakeholders? And remember, the word stakeholders means they've got a stake. There's something important here. And I think it's really important that before you even run the meeting, that basically you have had pre-sessions with every one of the people who are attending, or at least the key stakeholders, because you really got to understand how do they see the situation. And I take that strategic planning tool, the task map, and I say, what do they currently think? What do they currently feel? And what are they currently doing about it? And then actually the key thing is, what is the deliverables? What do you want people to walk away from the workshop thinking, feeling, and ultimately doing? And then critically, when you're looking about where's the objective, where do they want to get to, I think a really important question to ask is, what's the barrier? What's getting in the way? Why haven't they already got there? Because when you get to hear those on an individual basis outside of the meeting, sometimes you get to hear what is really stopping this from going on. Because very often, this isn't the first time they've done a workshop about this. I also think it's really important to have a problem owner defined. So someone who in the meeting you can go to, who can actually help sort of guide the process through in case you need it. Now, what I think you've got to do is, so let's talk about some of the specifics about the people in the room. Look, very often there's a whole bunch of emotions that are going to come into that room. There's going to be the emotions of anxiety. There's going to be emotions of frustration. They could be thinking it's a complete waste of their time. There could be some annoyance with some of the other members in that team. So all these things, you basically, when you come in there, you've got to recognize there's a lot of emotions in that cauldron, and you've got to learn how to hold that. And you've got to create a safe space that people feel is okay. And we talk about psychological safety. This idea that basically people can feel they can express what they need to say. And that's why we always talk about the contracting. Now, how to be in this space. What is acceptable? And once that's agreed and it's written up, at least then you can go back to, hold on, are we really still delivering and honouring what we said in the contract? I think that's really important because you've got to hold this space. And I think when you're in there, you've got to be hyper vigilant upon what's going on. Sure, you've done the pre-planning and you worked out the exercise, and that's all great. But I think you've got to be absolutely flexible. You've got to be like on a surfboard. You've got to be constantly moving and sensing what's going on. You're aware of like, that person has sort of checked out. That person seems to be angry with that person. That person is asking very sort of, aggressive, questions to other people or to yourself. People are questioning what is the process. And actually all these things you've got to therefore take on, hear it, and then adapt to it. And this is where the real skill comes in. And I often say that, to quote that famous Einstein quote about that to solve the problem cannot be solved at the same level that it was created. And very often you've got people coming into that room who are holding certain roles, certain personas, and actually, if you're not careful, when that all gets to be recreated and reenacted in that space, you're never going to be able to move it on. So part of your job is the ability to somehow break some of those and allow new thoughts and expressions to come into the room. And that's what you've got to do. So you've got to really open up the thinking, and very often that's where I draw upon all my strategic training. I may be doing inversion, I may be doing 5 whys, but one of the things is that I really invite you to do is, like, particularly if you're an outsider, you have the right to call things. I notice what's going on in the process when we're trying to come to some agreement here, or what's not being said. So very often I'll do what's the elephant in the room, get everyone to write it down privately, give it to me, I'll write it on the board, and then we can have an open discussion. These are all critical things that you need to go and do. Okay, so how to be, I think, when you are facilitating these things, it's a strange thing to say, but it's really all about you. And it's about, you need to engender the trust. There's a very famous person who's called Byron who talks about the basic assumptions. And when we work into groups, if they don't trust you and feel you're going to take them to where they need to get to, then they will sometimes rebel against you. So actually you have got to have this aura of calmness, confidence, you need to be untriggered. So when stuff comes up to you, you realize it's their stuff, it's not your stuff. And you've got to be able to hold the emotions, hold this, as I said, that cauldron of different emotions, and be able to deal with it. At the same time, you've got to be very open and curious. Very much you've got to be taking this approach of, like, curiosity, having the courage to maybe question stuff, but do it in a very open, I'm really interested why you see that. You're not to have up the answers, but what you are meant to do is you've got to break the paradigms. You've got to break their thinking free. Obviously, one of the things you've got to do is you've got to be deeply respectful, and these are all very senior, seriously qualified people. And as such, they know their business better than you do. And, if you are somehow sitting in some lauded higher place, they will sense that, because the non-verbal communication is so powerful. So actually, it's really important that you really do recognize that they own the problem and they own the answer. And all you're trying to do is to help have a process to get them to where they need to get to. I think, obviously, with any situation, it's about positivity, that there is hope, that we can do something about this. And as I said before, you've got to be very quick-witted. I do recommend a good night's sleep beforehand, and keep all the toxins out of your body, because you need to be very quick-witted. You need to be able to actually hear what's going on, be flexible, because whilst you do have an agenda, you do need to be flexible on that agenda. You need to follow where the energy is going and be prepared to park that and say, hold on, let's really focus on what John said just then. And as I said, I think you've got to be bold. You've got to be prepared to ask the questions that others dare not ask. Okay, now let's go back onto the logistics. This is the bog standard stuff, and I'm going to try to whiz through this because you probably know a lot of this stuff anyway. First thing, the room. Make sure it's a good, light, airy room. I think small, rooms with no lights don't help. Often we need breakout rooms. If you do have breakout rooms, make sure they're not half a mile away, because you then waste so much time trying to bring people back in. If it's a big enough room, you may be able to just sort of break them off and that stuff like that. I think attendees is really important. The quality of the workshop is going to be very much dependent upon who actually comes in. So I think there's something like, you don't want too many. Maybe 12 is about the ideal number. Once you get to 25, forget it. And you've got to have a diversity of points of view in that room. You've got to have not all one type of people. You do need to have a few different types of diverse thinkers from their experience to come into that space. So you can obviously, as I always talk about, the truth has multiple dimensions and multiple sides. And the only way we're going to really understand what the truth is if we have the opportunity to look at it from different angles. And likewise, you want to really invite people less on politics. I appreciate you're never going to get completely free of that, but more upon, are they going to add value into the room? I don't like people to come into the room who just sit there and don't say anything. I want them to be there and to take part. And if you've got certain people who don't do that, then maybe you can suggest there are better, uses of their time. Now, you need a really clear agenda because a lot of the work for a workshop is done before the workshop. I'd say half of it, because as I said in the first part, a lot of it is what you're doing in the room, on your surfboard. But actually, very clearly, what are the steps you're going to slowly take people through to get to the outcome? And I think what you've got to do is you've got to agree that with your problem owner, maybe some of the key stakeholders, so everyone is aligned on that. And when you come into the room, take them through the steps. Make sure it's on the table so there isn't the anxiety. Where are we going with this? I don't understand what the process is. People need to understand that. And as I said before, you've got to remember that it's a guide and you've got to be flexible, and every now and again something happens, and in consultation with the problem owner, you can sort of say, look, let's park the agenda right now. Let's come over here because this seems to be where the energy of the room is right now. As regards, very often when we run these, there's some information we need to do work on. And I think there's something about, you've got to be careful you don't give too much information. Our decision-making process is very much about overcomplicated, and we reduce the quality of our decision-making. So actually, you've got to make sure you put real, the most important stuff, and you strip away all the unimportant stuff. So there's a lot of work beforehand upon what are the key slides going to be shared. Honestly, my experience with, we'll do this all in pre-reading, it doesn't happen. So I do think you've got to bring the key information at the time into the room. And I think the key information needs to be up on the walls as well, so people can constantly reference to it rather than just someone just talking about it. I also think that when you're designing this, and you design the steps, less is more. There's something really powerful about the discussion, and the reflection is where the work really happens. And that's both inside the main plenary, but it's also within those breakout groups. I think having stimulus is really important, be it the Play-Doh on the desks and some Post-its and things like that. But the more that you can somehow engage their more sort of creative side of the brain, the more you're going to actually change the way they are seeing things and thinking about things. Because very often they've used a rationality to get to where they are. And right now, we need to find a new way, a new path to get through to what their solution is going to be. I always like to have, for example, up on the walls, lots of quotes, because I like the inspiration, and I'm often drawing upon those when I'm running these things. The other thing is I always like to have someone who's scribing, because I find that if I'm scribing, my handwriting is appalling, and I'm trying to pay attention to what the room is, and I'm thinking where the agenda's going, it's almost like means I'm doing none of the jobs properly. And I want to be absolutely there with the people and have someone who is going to be doing the writing. That's me. Likewise, I think we need to have a timekeeper. I think it's really important on these things. I appreciate meetings always start late, but people always want them to end exactly on time. And you've really got to honour and respect people's time. So literally, you do have someone in the back of the room saying 5 minutes, there's a bell that goes on the phone so you can pull things together. That is where you're going to keep people being entrusted in that process. Now, icebreakers, I've got mixed views about this. You've got to remember, very often, if you've got quite some senior people in the room, they've got a sort of image to go and maintain, and they don't really want to be jumping through a hula hoop and doing things like that. So choose icebreakers that are appropriate for the audience. Now, I come on to breakouts within a minute, but sometimes you get lots of people doing lots of ideas and you get into voting. I quite like sort of voting. It helps to cut stuff down. In the ideal world, I'd always love to do more of a sort of different people arguing for different solutions and getting that. Very often we don't seem to have the time. But voting, very often putting ticks upon the things they really like. So I love to have all the post-its up on the wall, all the breakout group, presentation notes up on the wall, and people can go around and pick on stuff and say what they really liked, what didn't work for them. That's really useful. And obviously the most important thing is you've got to have clear action steps. You've got to have a who, when, where, why, so at the end of it, you've got to put time in, so let's agree, what's the key action points? When's that going to happen? Who is going to do it? And then we walk away from that. And then very often, very quickly after, I always recommend within 24 hours, 48 hours, there is a printout of that. Maybe the other notes can come later on. But the most important thing is the action sheet that makes sure that things take place outside of the meeting, because you've got to pick up upon the momentum. And then obviously for yourselves, you've got to be thinking about constant and never-ending improvement. You've got to reflect what worked well, what didn't go so well, even better if, have feedback forms, conversations with the problem owner about it. So therefore you hone your skill. This isn't just trust me, managing these and facilitating these workshops are not an easy thing. Now let's talk about breakout groups, because I think it's really quite important that we do breakout groups. When you've got quite a lot of people, you need to maybe get them to either do everyone doing the same topic, or else you give different topics to different people, but I think there's something about assigning people. You can waste a lot of time in these meetings, like, oh, well, who's going to go with them? And then you get favoritisms and nonsense like that. I think working with the problem owner, who's going to go in which team, and a bit like the sort of, the wedding tables, they know better than you who gets on well, who jibes well with another person. And I think there should be mixed abilities. So there should be a senior person. There should be some more junior people if they're in the room as well. And I think also you've got to assign who is the leader. I always want to have someone who's going to be project managing that little breakout team. You may change it as you go through the day, but assign, right, I want you, John, to go and lead this. Maybe you have to have some pre-briefing sessions with them beforehand. And maybe you say, and I'd like to have Sarah to go and do the feedback, so you're not wasting a lot of time. And I think there is, a need for, when you go these breakouts, to have a clarity of requirement. Write it down. So when they go in their breakout rooms, they've got the piece of paper. Exactly what are the requirements? And for me, give them a template to fill in, because then it makes it really easy. And likewise, you've got to put proper time into that. All too often I see that, okay, you've got 10 minutes. And by the time they've got to the room, they're settled down, they've gone through the normal sort of, initial bit of discussion, of just getting to know each other, they've run out of time. So you've got to make sure you give them a proper amount of time. This always takes longer than you first think. And basically, and wander around, are you all clear? Do you know what's going on? There's often a lot of anxiety about performance here. And they often ask questions, so you can put them at ease about that stuff. And like I say, keep it to time, have timing notes. Hi guys, you've got another 15 minutes left. You've got another 5 minutes left. Okay, could you come back in the room in a minute's time? That's all really important stuff. So just to conclude, there are two big parts about facilitating workshops. There's all the logistics I've just talked about, but the most important is the people. And the people is two parts. It's them in the room, and managing them and managing their safety and managing their trust. And there's you and how you come across and how you facilitate that space. Anyway, I hope that helps. Clearly, you know, if you want any workshops to be facilitated, or if you want to actually attend my workshop to learn how to do this, I'm open. Thanks for your time.